The air in Pinnacle Creek, Arizona, 1871, was a suffocating blanket of heat and dust. It clung to the skin like a second unwanted layer, tasted like grit on the tongue, and turned the vast blue sky into a hazy, shimmering canvas. The only sound louder than the relentless buzz of cicadas was the creak of the wagon wheels as Elias Vance, a man in his late 20s whose eyes held the weary skepticism of a former city journalist, guided his exhausted horse toward the settlement. Elias wasn't here for a story. Not officially, anyway. He was here for his sister, Lydia. Her letters, once filled with cheerful, if slightly naive descriptions of life in the burgeoning West, had recently taken on a strange, unsettling tone. They spoke less of planting crops or building fences and more of the unity and the profound wisdom of their leader, a figure known only as Father Malachi. Lydia wrote of a community where burdens were lifted, where truth was purified, and where their souls were being prepared for a higher purpose. Elias read between the lines and heard the slow, creeping sound of fanaticism. Pinnacle Creek itself was less a town and more a temporary scar on the desert landscape. A few wooden structures, sun-bleached and leaning, comprised the general store, a saloon, and a blacksmith. But what dominated the area was the massive, newly constructed assembly hall belonging to Malachi's followers. It stood on a slight rise, meticulously painted white against the ochre backdrop, radiating a sense of unnerving order. Elias stopped the wagon near the saloon, the only place he figured a newcomer might find an honest, or at least a liquored, opinion. As he stepped down, the sun beat against the wide brim of his hat, forcing him to squint. A few men, their faces deeply tanned and lined, eyed him with a mixture of suspicion and indifference. Inside the saloon, the air was marginally cooler, thick with the smell of stale beer, sawdust, and unwashed bodies. Elias ordered a whiskey and took a seat in a corner booth, preferring to observe before engaging. The bartender, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and perpetually worried eyes, slid the glass over. "New face?" the bartender grunted, wiping a mug with a rag that looked dirtier than the floor. "You passin' through or lookin' to stay?" "Just visiting," Elias replied, keeping his voice low and neutral. "Looking for my sister, Lydia Vance. She joined that group. The Unity." He gestured vaguely toward the assembly hall on the hill. The bartender's grip on the rag tightened. He glanced nervously at a few patrons who had gone silent, their attention now subtly focused on Elias. The Unity. Well, they keep to themselves. And their numbers are growing. They don't take kindly to outsiders poking around. "I'm not poking around. I'm family. I just want to make sure she's all right." The bartender leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, mister, she's probably all right. They're devoted. They work hard. They're quiet. But they got this Father Malachi. He's the core of it all." "What about him?" Elias pressed, taking a slow sip of the harsh liquor. "They say he's a prophet. He came out of nowhere about a year ago, charismatic, preaches about returning to purity, absolute commitment. He holds these ceremonies. They call it the cleansing of the dawn. It's up at the hall every morning just after sunrise. And, well, you heard the rumors about the women?" Elias had not, but the bartender's hesitation was enough to spike his journalistic curiosity and his protective fear. "What rumors?" "They're secretive," the bartender mumbled, glancing around again. "But people talk. They say Malachi insists that a select group of the purest female followers, always young, always unmarried, bathe with him as part of the ritual, naked, to cleanse the new day and draw pure light into the community. It's what keeps them bound to him, keeps the town afraid to interfere." A knot of icy dread formed in Elias's stomach. The thought of his gentle, naive sister involved in something so perverse, even if it was framed as a holy act, was sickening. "And the sheriff? No one reports this?" "This is the Arizona territory, mister. Sheriff is 40 miles away and got his own troubles. Besides, Malachi is clever. Everything is consensual, they claim. A holy vow. No evidence of force, just belief. And nobody here wants to cross a zealot with a growing congregation. Elias finished his drink, the taste of cheap whiskey replaced by the bitter flavor of impending danger. He knew instantly that walking up to that hall and demanding his sister back wouldn't work. It would simply make him an outsider, an enemy, and would likely push Lydia further away, deeper into the Unity's control. He needed to understand Malachi. He needed to find the chink in the Prophet's armor. "Do you know where the Unity members live?" Elias asked. "They have a compound behind the assembly hall, barracks style. Malachi lives in a small, separate house near the spring. The rest of the town keeps a healthy distance." The bartender looked Elias directly in the eye, his gaze a mixture of pity and warning. "You came a long way, but you need to tread carefully. People disappear out here." Elias rented a small, dilapidated shack on the edge of the settlement, a safe distance from the assembly hall but close enough to watch. As the sun began to dip below the jagged desert horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of red and orange, he sat on his porch, cleaning his old Remington revolver. The silence of the desert was deceptive, a cover for the subtle tension that hung over Pinnacle Creek. He needed an ally, someone inside, or at least someone willing to talk. He needed to infiltrate, not confront. His sister's face, smiling and innocent, was the only motivation he required. He was no detective or hero, just a scared older brother. But the journalist in him was already piecing together the outline of a terrifying, very human crime. The air was still hot, but the shadows were growing long, swallowing the details of the white assembly hall. It looked less like a house of God now, and more like a mausoleum waiting to claim its next occupant. Elias reholstered the revolver, the metallic click a stark, comforting sound in the oppressive stillness. He knew what had to be done. Tomorrow he would walk up that hill. He wouldn't demand. He would observe. He would lie. He would join. Before you dive into the next chapter and see Elias's first move against Father Malachi, take a moment to subscribe. Hit that like button, ring the notification bell, and join our channel so you don't miss any part of this intense 10-chapter story of suspicion, deception, and the darkest corners of human devotion. Elias walked the dusty path toward the assembly hall at mid-morning, deliberately choosing a time when the cleansing of the dawn would be over. He wore clothes that were clean but faded, trying to project a sense of respectable destitution. A man seeking refuge, not conflict. He was met at the entrance of the compound by a tall, stern woman in a simple gray dress, her face devoid of makeup and expression. She carried a shovel as if it were a scepter. "State your purpose," she said, her voice flat and cold. "I seek the Unity," Elias replied, trying to imbue his voice with a manufactured humility. "I've been wandering, seeking direction, seeking truth." He paused, letting the key word hang in the dry air. "I heard of Father Malachi's wisdom. I believe my soul is ready to be prepared." The woman's icy gaze scrutinized him. "The preparation is difficult. The path to purity requires great sacrifice. We do not tolerate the weak or the cynical." "My cynicism is my weakness," Elias confessed, a truthful lie. "I wish to shed it." A moment later, he was being led into a plain, cavernous room within the assembly hall. The air here was cooler, smelling faintly of old soap and something acrid, like burnt sage. Standing before a simple wooden pulpit was Father Malachi. Malachi was not the wild-eyed fanatic Elias had half expected. He was a man in his mid-40s, handsome in a rugged, almost clerical way, with startlingly clear blue eyes and a carefully maintained beard. He wore spotless white linens, which stood in stark contrast to the dust and grime of the Arizona territory. His presence was not aggressive, but utterly dominant. "Welcome, brother," Malachi said, his voice a smooth baritone that seemed to ripple with genuine warmth. "What name do you bear?" "My name is Thomas Shaw. I am a humble carpenter." Lies layered upon lies. Malachi smiled, and it was a masterpiece of controlled sincerity. Thomas, the desert strips away the superfluous, does it not? We here at the Unity seek to strip away the corruptions of the world, to return to the dawn state. He walked slowly, his gaze holding Elias's. You will find no greater purpose than serving the pure life here. Elias had to ask about Lydia. I believe my younger sister is already under your guidance. Lydia Vance. Malachi paused, his brow furrowing slightly, as if recalling one among thousands. Ah, Lydia, a good, pure-hearted girl. She came to us lost, and now she is found. She is on the path to becoming one of our most valued handmaidens of the dawn. The term sent a fresh wave of nausea through Elias. Handmaidens, the bath ritual. I wish to join her in service, Elias insisted, to support her in this newfound truth. Malachi nodded slowly. Your bond is commendable, Thomas. But here, the only bond that matters is the one to the Unity. Before you can speak to Lydia, before you can truly join, you must first demonstrate your commitment. You must take the vow of silence. Silence? For 3 full days, Malachi explained, his voice becoming firmer. You will work, you will eat, you will observe, but you will not speak a single word. This silence cleanses the mind of the world's babble and allows the true voice of the Unity to enter. If you break the vow, you are deemed impure and must leave immediately. This was an unexpected but necessary obstacle. 3 days of silence would prevent Elias from questioning or exposing anything, but it would also grant him unfettered access to the compound and its routines. I accept the vow, Elias stated, hoping his eagerness didn't sound too suspicious. Excellent. Malachi turned to the stern woman, whose name was Sister Abigail. Abigail, take Brother Thomas to the men's barracks. Assign him to the water detail. He will ensure the spring is clear for the morning's cleansing. Elias followed Sister Abigail, his mind reeling. The water detail. This would put him in direct proximity to the source of the rumored ritual. The men's barracks were sparse, functional, and clean to the point of austerity. As Elias lay down on his rough cot that evening, he could hear the low, rhythmic chanting emanating from the assembly hall. He knew his sister was somewhere nearby. He could feel her presence in the stifling, pious atmosphere. The next morning, long before dawn, Elias was awakened and handed a bucket and a shovel. He walked down the path behind the hall, where a small, clear spring emerged from the rock, the only reliable water source for miles. He was joined by 2 other men, silent and hollow-eyed, who went about clearing the silt and debris with mechanical efficiency. As the eastern sky began to pale, Elias finished his work. He hid his shovel behind a thicket of brush and positioned himself subtly behind a cluster of boulders near the spring's edge. From here, he had an unobstructed, if partially obscured view of the natural basin where the spring water collected. Minutes later, the Unity members arrived. They were silent, organized, and moved with a somber dignity. Father Malachi led the procession, followed by Sister Abigail and 8 young women. Elias's blood ran cold when he saw Lydia. She looked thinner, her eyes too wide, but she moved with the same unsettling, quiet devotion as the others. She was one of the handmaidens. The scene unfolded exactly as the bartender had rumored. Malachi knelt by the water, and the women, including Lydia, began to slowly, methodically remove their clothes. There was no shame, no flirtation, just the chilling solemnity of a perverse religious observance. Elias watched horrified as Malachi and the 8 young women entered the cool spring water. The cleansing was not a private, whispered affair, but a public, silent ceremony witnessed by the rest of the congregation who stood on the banks, heads bowed, accepting this display of purity. It wasn't just about Malachi's control over the young women's bodies. It was a profound act of psychological domination over the entire group, forcing them to accept the unacceptable normalizing the obscene in the name of piety. He had confirmation. The nightmare was real. Now, Elias needed a plan to get his sister out, a plan that required more than just the silent observation of a carpenter. Elias spent the remainder of his first silent day working alongside the men. He discovered they were mostly simple laborers, drawn by Malachi's promise of a stable community and a divine purpose that gave meaning to their backbreaking work in the Arizona heat. They were not malicious, merely broken and easily led. He focused his attention on the logistics of the unity, noting that all major supplies and decisions flowed through the assembly hall. His immediate target for information became the records room, a small, locked office adjacent to the main pulpit. The true secrets of any organization are usually found in its ledgers. On his second day of silence, Elias was assigned to help move crates of canned goods being delivered from the nearest major settlement. This required working inside the main hall. He found an opportunity during the midday meal. While most of the members, including Sister Abigail, were eating in the communal dining area, Elias feigned a cramp in his leg and lingered near the records room. The door was locked with a simple iron padlock. Elias had learned a few practical skills traveling the West, including the finesse required to pick a basic lock. Working quickly and silently, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, he used a thin piece of hardened wire he'd concealed in his boot heel. The lock clicked open. Elias slipped inside and relocked the door from the inside using a small hook latch he noticed on the doorframe. The room was small and airless, filled with the dry scent of aging paper. He found not just one ledger, but an entire chest of documents. The first ledger contained simple financial records, donations, supply purchases, land leases. The unity was surprisingly wealthy. The money was being funneled through a shell entity in Phoenix. The second ledger was far more revealing. It was the membership register. Elias scanned the names until he found Lydia Vance. Next to her name, in Malachi's elegant, looping handwriting, was the designation handmaiden, status, virgin, value, high. The use of the word value was like a punch to the gut. It confirmed that the women were not just participants, but commodities in Malachi's twisted system. He kept turning pages, looking for something to explain Malachi's origins, but the ledger offered no answers. He moved to the third and final item, a stack of letters bound with twine. These were not internal documents, but personal correspondence. Sealed letters being held by Malachi, clearly meant to be mailed out but deliberately suppressed. Elias carefully broke the seal on the top letter. It was addressed to an elderly couple in Ohio. The content was from a young man named Samuel, who had joined the Unity 6 months prior, and was now asking his parents for a large sum of money, claiming it was required for his initiation and elevation in the truth. Samuel promised the money would be repaid with spiritual blessings. He signed off with an unnerving fervor. Elias looked at the register. Samuel's name was marked with status, debtor, value, low, maintain. Malachi was not only exploiting belief but extortion. He was isolating his followers, convincing them to drain their savings and the savings of their families, holding the money and the letters as a leash. As he turned to a second letter, his foot scraped loudly against the wooden floorboards. "Who is in there?" Sister Abigail's sharp, cold voice cut through the silence outside the door. She must have finished her meal and returned to the hall. Elias froze. He was under the vow of silence. Even a whispered excuse was a violation. Breaking the vow meant immediate expulsion, which meant losing access to Lydia. He quietly gathered the letters back into the bundle, replaced the twine, and slipped the membership ledger under his tunic. He could not risk being found with evidence, so he hid the ledger inside the cavity of the desk. "I know someone is in there," Abigail hissed, rattling the hook latch on the door. "Open this door. You are breaking the purity of the hall." Elias realized the lock was only a deterrent. Abigail was strong enough to force the latch. He had seconds. He moved to the small, grimy window overlooking the back compound. It was nailed shut, but Elias was a man desperate. He braced his foot against the opposite wall and kicked the wooden frame with all his strength. The dry, brittle wood splintered with a sharp crack, and the glass rattled violently but did not break. He kicked again, and the window frame burst outward. He scrambled through the opening, dropping lightly onto the hard-packed dirt, just as the sound of the records room door being violently kicked open echoed from inside the hall. Elias stayed low, running toward the cover of the men's barracks. He heard Abigail's voice screaming now, the vow of silence forgotten in her anger. "Intruder, defiler, sound the alarm. Father Malachi, the new man has tainted the books." He had two choices, hide or run. Running would save himself, but doom Lydia. He chose to hide, hoping his silence and the chaos would protect his cover. He scrambled into the latrine, the filth and stench an almost welcome cover against the white purity of the unity. He waited, heart hammering, clutching the hidden ledger as the sound of running boots and the sudden tense silence of the compound searching for the intruder, the silent man named Thomas Shaw, closed in around him. The search was frantic, but focused primarily on the perimeter of the compound, confirming the Unity's paranoia of outsiders. Elias remained huddled in the oppressive darkness of the latrine for nearly an hour. The membership ledger pressed against his chest. When he finally emerged, dusty and smelling foul, he walked openly toward the assembly hall with a look of confused innocence, playing the role of the silent newcomer startled by the commotion. Sister Abigail was standing by the damaged records room, her face contorted with rage. When she saw Elias, she marched toward him, her hand raised. "Where were you, Thomas?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "We had an intrusion. Were you near here?" Elias simply shook his head, pointing to his mouth, reminding her of his vow of silence. He pointed to the latrine and made a gesture of necessity, then shrugged with believable helplessness. Abigail glared at him, suspicion warring with the rigid structure of the Unity's laws. She could not prove he had broken the vow, and she knew Malachi would punish any false accusation. "You will be watched, Thomas, closely. Now get back to work." Elias nodded meekly and walked to the workshed, the ledger still safely tucked beneath his shirt, its weight a comforting burden of truth. That evening, after the communal meal, Elias managed to isolate himself on his cot. Using the dim light from a small lamp, he opened the ledger to the back pages. Here, Malachi kept his own handwritten journal entries, disguised as esoteric notes on spiritual philosophy. The entries were not spiritual at all. They were a cold, calculating log of his followers. One entry caught Elias's attention. "The purity of the dawn is paramount. It must be maintained as it is the glue. It secures their devotion and the outside world's fear. But the well is shallow. We must secure more water rights. The spring will not last the summer with our growing numbers." Water. In the arid Arizona territory, water was life, and Malachi had control over the only known reliable source in Pinnacle Creek. The cleansing of the dawn was not just a perversion, it was a mechanism of economic control. If the spring ran dry, the entire community would collapse. Malachi needed to expand his territory and his pool of followers to survive. Elias also found notes on the handmaidens. Each woman, including Lydia, was meticulously tracked. Her health, her compliance, her family's wealth, and most disturbingly, her emotional stability. Beside Lydia's name was a recent note. "Vance girl showing signs of questioning. Needs reassignment to heavier labor, separate from the others. A test of her commitment." This was his leverage. Lydia was struggling. He had to reach her now before Malachi's test broke her completely. The vow of silence ended at dawn the next day, but he couldn't wait. He needed to talk to her tonight. Elias waited until the barracks were dark and the desert quiet. He crept out, moving silently through the moonlit compound. The women's barracks were on the opposite side of the assembly hall. He reached the window of the women's quarters. It was tightly secured. He threw a tiny handful of pebbles against the wooden frame. Silence. He tried again, slightly louder. After a tense minute, the window was gently pushed open a fraction of an inch. A face peered out, not Lydia's, but another young handmaiden, her eyes wide with terror. "Who is it?" she whispered. "I am Thomas. I am under the vow, but I must speak to Lydia. It is urgent. Her brother sent me." The girl hesitated, then opened the window wider. Lydia was sleeping on a nearby cot. The girl nudged her awake. Lydia sat up, her face a mask of confusion and exhaustion. She came to the window, and when she saw Elias, her eyes, the same shade of green as their mother's, widened in disbelief and fear. Elias ignored the vow, the danger, everything. He had to use the few words he had carefully planned. "Lydia," he whispered fiercely, "it's me, Elias. I'm here to take you home. You are in danger." Lydia looked at him, not with joy or relief, but with a horrifying confusion. "Elias, what are you doing? You shouldn't be here. This is a place of purity." "Purity? They're controlling you. That man, Malachi, he's a con artist. He is using you, Lydia. The cleansing. It's disgusting, and you know it. I saw the notes about you. He knows you're questioning him. He's going to punish you." Lydia's composure broke, and a flicker of the old fear returned to her eyes. "He is only testing my faith. He knows I am weak. He says the shame is the world's sickness leaving my body. You don't understand the truth. The truth is in the ledger," Elias whispered, holding up the book. "He logs you like cattle, Lydia. He's using you to extort money from families. He is running out of water and will discard the weak." Suddenly, a loud, heavy footstep sounded just around the corner of the building. "Who is speaking?" I heard a man's voice. It was the deep, measured voice of Father Malachi himself. He must have been doing his nightly rounds. Elias pushed the ledger into Lydia's hands. "Read it. Meet me at the stream at noon tomorrow. If you don't show, I'm going to the sheriff. Don't speak. Don't let him know you have this." He melted back into the shadows of the compound, just as Malachi rounded the corner. "Who are you speaking to, handmaiden?" Malachi's voice was velvet smooth, but laced with iron. Lydia stood by the window, clutching the ledger hidden within the folds of her dress. Her eyes darted from the retreating shadows to the charismatic, dangerous man before her. Her choice, and Elias's fate, rested on her next words. The dawn of the third day arrived, signaling the end of Elias's official vow of silence. He was now free to speak, a liberty that suddenly felt more dangerous than the silence had been. He returned to his work at the barracks, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. He didn't have to wait long. Immediately after the morning meal, Sister Abigail led him directly to Father Malachi's modest, well-kept house near the spring. Malachi sat behind a sturdy oak table, his expression one of profound disappointment rather than anger. Lydia was seated silently next to him, her head bowed. "Thomas," Malachi began, gesturing for Elias to sit. "The vow of silence has ended. Speak your truth. Last night, I found my handmaiden Lydia by her window, looking troubled. She claimed she was restless, but I detected a disruption in her spirit. Did you, perhaps, break your silence prematurely?" Elias looked at Lydia. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was a hair's breadth from breaking. He had to be her strength. "Father Malachi," Elias said, his voice firm and resonating, carrying the practiced authority of a man used to interrogation, not obedience. "I did speak to her, and I confess." Malachi's smile was triumphant. "I knew it. Impurity always betrays itself. You will leave the unity today, Thomas." "I confess that I was overcome by the sight of my long-lost sister," Elias continued, ignoring the expulsion. "I found myself by her window, unable to resist speaking her name. I told her I missed her, and that I was happy she had found purpose. I begged her to talk to me when my vow was lifted. He looked directly at Lydia, projecting all his love and warning in his gaze. I am sorry, Father. It was a failure of the heart, not the spirit. I love my sister, and seeing her devotion to the unity was overwhelming. It was a perfect, calculated confession. It admitted to breaking the silence, but painted the act as one of sentimental weakness, not investigative intent. It made Elias look harmless. Malachi studied him, his eyes like ice chips. Lydia, what did your brother say to you? Lydia slowly lifted her head. She met Elias's eye for a fraction of a second, and Elias saw a spark of conflict. The pure, indoctrinated obedience fighting the stark, ugly truth of the ledger. She turned to Malachi. Father, my spirit was weak. I was confused by his appearance. He only spoke of missing me and said he was glad I had found the unity. He cried. A lie. A calculated, devastating lie that protected Elias, indicating she had read the book. Malachi leaned back, his dominant posture slightly deflated. A sentimental breach, then, not a treasonous one. The spirit of the vow remains unbroken. He looked at Elias, a renewed suspicion flickering in his eyes. You will be punished, Thomas, not for treason but for weakness. You will be assigned to the rock quarry, and you will not see your sister for a week. Do you accept this judgment? Elias nodded. I accept, Father. Good. Now leave us. Elias walked out, feeling the heavy gaze of Malachi on his back. He had survived the morning confession, and Lydia had protected him. The suspense now lay in whether she truly believed the ledger. He walked toward the rock quarry, a brutal, sun-baked site where men were laboring to cut stone for new constructions. The work was meant to be physically punishing, designed to break his will, but Elias welcomed the exhaustion. It kept his mind sharp. At noon, the sun was a white-hot hammer on the Arizona landscape. The men broke for a brief, parched lunch. Elias sat alone, picking at his dry hardtack, watching the path leading back toward the spring. He waited, the suspense agonizing. Had she been convinced? Had the brainwashing been too deep? Would Malachi be watching? Suddenly, a figure appeared on the path. It was Lydia. She was wearing a straw hat and carrying a pail of water, likely a duty assigned to her after the interrogation. She approached him slowly, her face unreadable. She handed him the water. Thank you, Lydia. She leaned in, pretending to adjust her hat, and whispered, her voice rough with fear and a strange, desperate strength. I read the ledger, Elias. The names, the money, the water. I burned it in the cookhouse fire after I came out of his house. I am terrified, but I believe you. I found another name. What name? The girl who let you talk to me. Sarah. She has been absent from the cleansing for 2 days. Father Malachi said she was simply purifying her sin of doubt in a private cabin, but she has a note next to her name. Status: disposing of asset. Finalization due. The words disposing of asset chilled Elias to the core. This wasn't just about money and control, it was about life and death. Malachi didn't just excommunicate, he eliminated. Where is the cabin? Elias whispered, his heart pounding. Beyond the spring, into the narrow ravine. It's a small, hidden shed. You have to go tonight, before he finalizes anything. The water is almost dry, Elias. He needs to move soon. We all do. Elias gripped the bucket, his knuckles white. The plan had just shifted from extraction to rescue. He had to find Sarah and secure evidence of Malachi's true murderous nature before Malachi could use the failing water supply as an excuse to abandon the entire compound, or worse. The evening dust storm was a stroke of unexpected luck. It rolled in off the desert, a swirling, opaque curtain of ochre that muffled sound and swallowed light. The Unity members retreated indoors, sealing their windows against the grit, leaving the compound eerily quiet. Elias waited until deep into the night, when the wind was still howling, but the dust had settled enough to allow for movement. He armed himself with his Remington and a sturdy shovel from the quarry, a silent tool for digging or defense. He made his way past the assembly hall and toward the spring. The wind whistling through the dry brush sounded like whispered warnings. He could still hear the low, rhythmic chanting from the hall, a constant unsettling reminder of Malachi's pervasive influence. He found the spring, its basin now alarmingly low, revealing more cracked mud than water. He followed the winding, narrow trail Lydia had described, which led into a cleft in the rocks, a miniature ravine barely wide enough for one person. The cabin was exactly as Lydia described, a small, rough-hewn shed, tucked away and almost invisible from the main compound. A single oil lamp burned inside, casting a flickering, ominous glow through the single uncurtained window. Elias approached cautiously, the dry sand crunching softly under his boots. He pressed his ear against the thin wooden wall. He could hear Sarah weeping softly, punctuated by low, deliberate male voices. He moved to the window. Peeking through a knothole, he could make out the scene. Sarah, the young handmaiden, was huddled on a cot, her face tear-stained, her dress ripped at the shoulder. Standing over her were Father Malachi and a tall, brooding man Elias had recognized from the compound. Brother Caleb, one of Malachi's most silent and physically imposing followers. "Silence, Sarah," Malachi commanded, his voice devoid of the warm, spiritual veneer he used in public. It was cold, clinical, and terrifying. "Your doubt is a cancer. It must be excised before it contaminates the others. This is for the unity." "Please, Father," Sarah sobbed. "I want to go home. My mother sent money. I saw the letter." Malachi backhanded her, the sound a sharp, sickening slap in the confined space. "Your mother sent her purity to the cause. You are an asset, Sarah, one that is now compromised by your weak questioning. Compromised assets must be disposed of cleanly." Caleb stepped forward, holding a length of thick rope. The horror of the scene solidified in Elias's mind. Malachi wasn't just controlling them, he was murdering those who threatened to expose him. Sarah was to be quietly eliminated, and her disappearance blamed on the harshness of the desert or a change of heart. Elias knew he had to act now. He couldn't risk the sound of a gunshot. He backed away from the window, raised the heavy shovel, and slammed the flat head of the blade against the wooden door just beside the latch. The door, old and dry, splintered inward with a loud crack, tearing the hinges. Elias burst into the cabin, the Remington aimed at Malachi. "Hands in the air, Malachi! It's over!" Elias roared, the sound echoing violently in the small space. Malachi, momentarily stunned by the sudden violent intrusion, raised his hands immediately. His facade cracked completely, revealing the animalistic fear beneath the prophet's calm. Caleb, however, reacted instantly, dropping the rope and lunging for Elias, his sheer bulk a terrifying weapon. Elias sidestepped the man's rush, bringing the butt of the Remington down in a brutal arc against the side of Caleb's head. The force of the blow staggered Caleb, who crashed into the wall, dazed but not out. "Stay down, Caleb!" Elias yelled, pointing the gun at the henchman. Malachi, seizing the split second of distraction, darted for a small, iron-banded chest tucked beneath the cot. "No!" Elias shouted. He knew whatever Malachi was reaching for was vital, a weapon or, more likely, a set of incriminating documents. Elias fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The deafening report in the tiny cabin was followed by the sound of splintering wood as dust and debris rained down. Malachi froze, his hand hovering over the chest. "Move away from the chest, Malachi." "Now," Elias ordered, his voice dangerously low. He gestured to Sarah. "Get out of here, Sarah. Run back to the compound. Find Lydia. Tell her to prepare. Go." Sarah, shaking violently, scrambled past the men and fled the cabin into the night. Elias kept the gun trained on Malachi, whose eyes were now blazing with a hatred so intense it was almost palpable. "You have no idea what you've done, Thomas," Malachi sneered, recovering his composure. "You've interrupted the Lord's work." You have signed your own death warrant. The Unity will crush you for this sacrilege. The only thing I've done, Elias retorted, moving slowly toward the chest, is stop a murder and expose a fraud. You're not a prophet, Malachi. You're a thief, an extortionist, and a killer, and I'm going to prove it. Elias quickly tied Father Malachi's hands behind his back, using the very rope Caleb had intended for Sarah. Caleb was still slumped against the wall, moaning, knocked semi-unconscious by the heavy blow. Elias turned his attention to the iron-banded chest. He used the butt of the Remington to smash the delicate lock. Inside, beneath a layer of religious pamphlets, he found exactly what he expected, the final damning evidence. There were 3 items. 1. A stack of forged deeds, documents transferring the meager land and property of newly initiated Unity members, like Lydia, to Malachi's Shell Corporation. 2. A thick journal, Malachi's personal diary, detailing his methods of manipulation, his financial scams, and, most crucially, his plans to dispose of at least 4 other compromised assets who had recently questioned the cleansing. 3. A small leather bag, filled with gold coins and the original letters of demand sent to the families of his wealthiest followers. The evidence was overwhelming. Elias needed to get it to the sheriff, 40 miles away, but he couldn't leave Malachi here, nor could he leave Lydia and the others unprotected. He dragged the still groggy Caleb outside and used a separate length of rope to secure him to the cabin's support beam. He then shoved Malachi back inside the shed, making it clear that any attempt to escape would be met with immediate force. "Listen to me, Malachi," Elias said, his voice hard. "I'm taking this evidence to the nearest authorities. If I find that any member of the Unity has been harmed when I return, I will come back for you. Understand?" Malachi merely laughed, a dry, chilling sound. "You cannot save them all, Thomas. You have disrupted the order. Now the collapse will be worse. They will turn on each other. The Unity will self-destruct. And you, the defiler, will be blamed." The sound of agitated voices approaching from the direction of the compound cut Malachi short. The gunshot, even muffled by the distance and the dust storm, had clearly been heard. Elias grabbed the chest of evidence and sprinted out of the ravine, heading not for the main path, but toward his own rented shack on the edge of town. He needed his horse and a meeting with Lydia. He reached the shack, saddled his horse quickly, and tied the heavy chest to the back. As he worked, he heard the faint, desperate shouts of Malachi's followers searching near the ravine. A shadow fell over him. Elias spun around, gun raised. It was Lydia, accompanied by Sarah, the girl he had rescued. They were both terrified, their clothing torn by the brush. "Elias, the camp is in chaos," Lydia whispered urgently. "Abigail has rallied the most devoted men. They found Caleb tied up. They know you took Malachi. They are searching for you." "I didn't take Malachi. I left him tied up in the cabin," Elias corrected. "I only took the evidence. We need to leave now." "No, Elias. They found the cabin empty. Someone else got to him. When the search party arrived, only Caleb was there. Malachi is gone." The chilling realization hit Elias. Malachi hadn't resisted because he had a plan B. There was an unseen witness, someone else who knew the cabin's location, someone who was loyal to Malachi but working outside the normal Unity structure. This explained Malachi's confidence. He was not only free, but he was now framing Elias. The prophet had simply vanished, becoming a martyr in the eyes of his fanatics. "We have to go to the sheriff now, Lydia. This evidence is all we have left. Tell Sarah to ride to the next town over and ask for help. We split up." It's too dangerous to stay together. Just as they were about to mount the horses, a harsh, echoing voice sliced through the darkness. "There he is, the imposter Thomas Shaw. He has captured our father and defiled our truth. Get him." It was Sister Abigail, leading a group of a dozen or more men, all carrying shovels, axes, and pitchforks. They were fanatics, driven by their twisted devotion and the fear of a world without their prophet. The final confrontation was no longer just about rescue or exposure. It was about survival. You've reached a pivotal moment in the story. Malachi has escaped, and Elias, Lydia, and Sarah are trapped. The only way to see how they escape the furious mob and uncover the identity of the unseen witness is to subscribe. Hit that like button and notification bell now so you don't miss the dramatic conclusion to this tense series. The furious mob, energized by Sister Abigail's zealotry and the sudden disappearance of their leader, swarmed toward Elias's shack. The moonlight glinted off the rough steel of their farming tools. "Lydia, Sarah, get on the horses now," Elias barked. He grabbed his saddlebags containing the most valuable evidence, Malachi's journal and the gold, leaving the bulkier chest of forged deeds. "I'll draw them away. Head directly for the sheriff's office. Don't stop for anything." Lydia hesitated, her eyes wide with fear for her brother. "Elias, they'll kill you." "I know," he said grimly, "but they won't expect a journalist to fight back. Go." He slapped the flanks of both horses. Lydia, pulling a terrified Sarah with her, rode off into the dark, kicking up a trail of dust that the wind immediately tried to consume. Elias didn't run. He had to ensure the mob followed him. He darted into the shack and immediately blew out the oil lamp, plunging the small structure into darkness. "He's in the shack. Get him!" Abigail shrieked, her voice hoarse with maniacal anger. The first two men, wielding a pitchfork and a heavy shovel, burst through the door. Elias, trained by the rough and tumble of frontier life, dropped low and swept the legs of the first man, who went down with a heavy thud. Before the second man could react, Elias jammed the barrel of his Remington into the man's throat, forcing him back out the door. Elias fired a shot into the air, a classic frontier signal, designed to sow panic and create a false sense of security about his remaining ammunition. "Stay back!" Elias roared. "I have proof. Your father Malachi is a murderer. I have his confession and the gold he stole from your families." The shout stalled the mob. They looked at each other, the fervor momentarily cooled by the stark accusation of theft. Abigail, recognizing the threat to their control, stepped forward, her voice rising to a frenzied pitch. "Silence the defiler. He is poisoning your ears. The gold is the Lord's investment. He lies. Take him for the price of treason." The mob surged again. Elias knew he couldn't take them all. He ran out the back window and sprinted toward the rocky arroyo behind the shack, the mob following him like a dark, vengeful wave. He scrambled up a small, steep rise, finding temporary cover behind a cluster of boulders. He could hear them below, shouting, their steps clumsy in the dark. Then, from the darkness above the assembly hall, came a distinct, chilling signal, a single, high-pitched whistle. It was followed by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, not from the direction Elias had fled, but from a different, unexpected angle. The mob stopped, confused. A powerful voice, rough and authoritative, cut through the noise. "Hold! The traitor is already in our custody. Stand down!" A figure rode into the moonlight, large and menacing on a dark horse, wearing a heavy ankle-length coat despite the heat. It was the man Elias had seen talking to the bartender, the one who had eyed him with particular suspicion, Jedediah. He was clearly not a part of the simple Unity faithful, but something more dangerous. Jedediah dismounted. His eyes scanned the rocks, finally settling on Elias. He carried a Winchester repeater, held with casual, deadly ease. "You've caused enough trouble, Thomas," Jedediah said, his voice flat. "Your sister and the other girl are already back in the compound. They didn't make it far. We were watching them. We were watching you." Elias felt a cold despair wash over him. Lydia was recaptured. He had failed. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, his voice strained. "The unseen witness? Malachi's guard?" Jedediah didn't answer. He simply aimed the rifle. "The assembly is waiting for you. Come down or I will bring you down." Just as Elias prepared to fire his last 2 bullets, a commotion erupted back near the assembly hall. Not shouting, but a panicked, wordless sound of alarm and confusion. Jedediah hesitated, turning his attention to the new chaos. Elias seized the moment. He didn't fire at Jedediah. Instead, he fired his remaining 2 shots at the flank of Jedediah's horse. The animal reared with a piercing scream of pain and fear, throwing Jedediah violently to the ground. Elias didn't wait. He clambered down the rocks and ran, dodging the stunned members of the mob, heading back toward the one place he knew offered the best chance of finding Lydia, Malachi's house near the spring. He realized now that Jedediah was the muscle, the man who handled the disposal of assets. But the sudden chaos at the hall meant something was happening inside the compound, something he hadn't planned for. He ran toward the assembly hall, the wind catching the distant scent of smoke. He saw a faint, unsettling orange glow flickering inside the windows of the hall. Lydia, captured desperate, had not given up. She had found a way to fight back. The assembly hall was on fire. Lydia had not been taken peacefully. She had used the few minutes of her recapture to enact a final, desperate act of sabotage. In the main meeting room, fueled by the conviction of the ledger's truth and the fear for Sarah, she had found an overturned oil lantern and the stack of flammable religious pamphlets. Elias arrived at the compound to find pure anarchy. The fire was spreading quickly through the dry wooden structure. Malachi's devoted followers were divided, some screaming and trying to save the building, others simply running in fear, and the most fanatical, led by Abigail, attempting to bring order through brutal enforcement. In the midst of the chaos, Elias spotted Lydia and Sarah. They were being dragged toward the burning hall by 3 men, clearly intended as an object lesson, a forced sacrifice to purify the contamination. "The traitor's sister!" Abigail screamed over the roar of the flames. "Bring her to the pulpit. She must cleanse the fire with her life." Elias knew this was it. He had no choice but to use his ultimate leverage, the evidence and the truth, in the final public confrontation. He sprinted toward the main entrance, pulling the gold-filled saddlebag from his shoulder. He threw a handful of gold coins into the heart of the frantic crowd. "Look at this! This is the truth your prophet preaches," Elias roared, his voice cracking with desperation and adrenaline. "He calls it investment. It's the money he stole from you, from Samuel, from the families he swore to protect." The coins, glinting in the dark and the orange firelight, landed in the dust. The most dedicated zealots ignored them, but the tired, hungry laborers paused, their eyes drawn to the unmistakable wealth. Elias ran directly to Sister Abigail, swinging the saddlebag full of gold like a heavy club. It struck Abigail square in the chest, knocking her to the ground, winded and stunned. He grabbed Lydia's arm. "We have to go, now!" But the path was blocked by Jedediah, who had arrived on foot, his face a mask of cold fury, his Winchester reloaded. "The escape ends here, Thomas," Jedediah snarled. Elias saw no way out. He had the journal and the gold, but he was pinned, his sister next to him, the fire raging behind them and the assassin in front. Then he heard a new familiar voice from the edge of the crowd. "The sheriff is coming. He's here." The bartender from Pinnacle Creek, his face white with terror, rode up on a mule, waving his hat frantically. He had seen the smoke and knew exactly what it meant. He was not a hero, but he was a witness. The mention of the sheriff caused a deeper panic among the mob. The laborers began to scatter. Malachi's system was built on isolation. The introduction of outside law enforcement was the final blow to their psychological control. Jedediah hesitated, his rifle lowering slightly as he surveyed the collapsing scene. "You can't save them all, Thomas," Jedediah repeated, his voice menacing. "The father is gone, but the seed of his truth remains. And the truth of his crimes remains with me," Elias countered, holding up Malachi's leather-bound journal. "This book proves he's a murderer and a fraud. You'll hang Jedediah when the law gets here." Jedediah knew he was beaten. The assembly hall, their center of power, was burning, the unity was dissolving, and the sheriff was minutes away. With a frustrated growl, Jedediah turned and fled, melting into the desert darkness, leaving the mob to their fate. The threat of Jedediah and the mob was gone, but the immediate threat remained. The assembly hall was a bonfire. "Lydia, Sarah, follow me," Elias cried. They ran, not toward the freedom of the desert, but toward Malachi's small, separate house near the spring. It was the only building far enough away from the hall to be safe, and it was the key to understanding Malachi's escape. They found the door ajar. Inside, the house was mostly empty, Malachi having packed his belongings. But on the sturdy oak table where he had interrogated Elias, a single item remained, a bloodied scrap of white linen, Malachi's clothing. He was injured, Elias noted. Jedediah wouldn't have left him if he was injured. Someone else helped him. Lydia noticed something else. On the floor, meticulously covered by a small rug, was a loose floorboard. Elias lifted the floorboard. Beneath it was a narrow, dirt-lined tunnel, a smuggler's escape route, built for an emergency. It was old, maybe dating back to an earlier prospector, but clearly recently used. "He was prepared," Elias whispered. "He knew this was temporary. He knew the spring would run dry. But who knew about this tunnel? Who helped him escape the cabin and get here?" They heard the sound of approaching horses, the sheriff and his deputies. They had won. They had the evidence, and they had survived. As Elias turned to leave the house, his eyes caught the light glinting off a small, silver locket lying on the floor beneath the table. He picked it up. It was Sister Abigail's. Abigail hadn't been screaming for Malachi's return or running in panic. She was the one who tied him up, then untied him from the cabin and led him to the escape tunnel. Her rage was a final theatrical act of loyalty, designed to cover their escape and frame Elias. She hadn't been fighting for the community. She was fighting for the man. Elias looked back at the burning assembly hall, the last symbol of the unity consuming itself. The truth was worse than he had imagined. The most fanatical follower, the one who enforced Malachi's purity, was also his hidden accomplice and lover, the ultimate, unseen witness who enabled the final act of evasion. Malachi and Abigail had escaped into the vast, unforgiving desert. The arrival of the sheriff, a stern, dust-caked man named Deputy Marshal Hayes, brought a swift, sobering end to the chaos. The fire eventually consumed the assembly hall, leaving only a smoking skeleton on the hill. Marshal Hayes listened intently to Elias's account, examining the journal, the gold, and the forged deeds. The evidence, coupled with the testimonies of Lydia and Sarah, was irrefutable. The unity was a massive, carefully constructed fraud built on extortion, manipulation, and murder. "This Malachi," Marshal Hayes said, flipping through the diary's cruel entries, "he's not a prophet. He's a snake oil salesman with a taste for control and gold." The sheer cruelty of the cleansing ritual was just the mechanism to break their wills. The women were commodities, and the spring water was his ticking clock. Hayes organized the remaining members. With their prophet and his zealot second-in-command gone, the remaining followers were broken, disillusioned, and facing the harsh reality of their debts and lack of leadership. Many simply packed their meager belongings and started the long trek home. Their faith shattered, but their lives saved. Elias and Lydia stood on the edge of the settlement, watching the final exodus. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, highlighting the fresh scars of the disaster. "He's gone, Elias," Lydia said, her voice quiet but steady. She was pale, but the old, naive light in her eyes had been replaced by a new, guarded strength. "He's out there somewhere with Abigail. She was the key. She saw through him, but she loved the power and the secrecy more. Her betrayal of the other women. It's the worst part." "They'll be found," Elias assured her, though he knew the desert was vast and unforgiving. They won't stop. Malachi can't live without control. He'll start another unity somewhere else. But now we have his face, his methods, and his book. It's only a matter of time. Marshal Hayes approached them. We've sent out riders. We have the tunnel, and we found a secondary cache of supplies in the ravine. They won't get far without more resources. But I need you to understand. They are dangerous and smart. They will be looking for you, Elias. You exposed them. Elias nodded. He understood. He had won the battle for Lydia and the truth, but he had earned a powerful, relentless enemy. He looked at Lydia. Are you ready to go home? I am ready, she replied, a genuine smile finally touching her lips. But I won't forget this. I won't be naive again. I know what to look for now. Elias returned to the shack to retrieve the last of his gear. He tucked Malachi's journal securely into his personal pack. The story was not over. It was merely paused. As he led his horse and Lydia's wagon away from Pinnacle Creek, the smoke from the ruined assembly hall was the last thing they saw. The desert was silent once more, but the silence was heavy with the possibility of return. The community Malachi had built was destroyed, but the man, the killer, and his most loyal acolyte were free. The ultimate fear was not the horror they had just escaped, but the knowledge that somewhere out there, in another dusty, isolated corner of the West, Father Malachi would find a new spring, a new set of vulnerable followers, and a new group of handmaidens. Elias Vance, the journalist, knew he could never fully go back to his old life. He had a story to tell, a story of the true darkness of human nature, and a responsibility to follow the trail of a monster hiding in plain sight. The wind picked up, erasing the tracks of the fleeing prophet and the retreating survivors. The only certainty was that the desert held many secrets, and the most dangerous ones were always human.